Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or is it now good evening? Perhaps that's too soon. Welcome to the McClure Gallery at the Visual Arts Center. And I have to thank individually Natasha Reed, the director, Barbara Snosky, the director, the manager of the gallery itself, and Rennie Duval, who helped do all the hanging. Tremendous team. For the catalog, and there is a catalog, Zoe Toussignan was the coordinator of that. Colette Tuga provided the translation of my essay, and the designer Jean Doyon designed it and saw that it went to print and came to fruition. I have at the same time developed a website, robertgraham.ca, for which I am grateful to my daughter Morgana Graham for constructing. I thank you. I thank all of you. The premise of this exhibition is based on an idea that took a while to grow. Some time ago, the previous director of the gallery, Victoria LeBlanc, invited me as a critic to come up with some idea for a show that I might be willing to curate. And that sat with me for a while. And then it occurred to me a little while ago that I could build from what I had worked with, which was to say that the work that I had written on and the artists that I had written on. And then at the same time, I realized that I had started to gather quite a collection around these artists, these photographers. I thought there was something interesting there to both go and look at the history of the last 40 years of writing on photography in Montreal and to consider and reflect on a collecting practice at the same time. So the show is called 3 Montreal Photographers Plus. The plus are 3 non-Montreal photographers whose work is attached in a sort of tangential fashion, in some ways reflects upon the 3 native photographers. And I will be introducing them to you shortly. We're going to start with Tom Gibson. Tom Gibson was born in 1930 in Edinburgh. He turned 90 last December. And he was a photographer, came to Canada, first to Toronto, then to Montreal. He was also a teacher and administrator at Concordia University. In fact, I was talking to my next door neighbor the other day about the show, and she mentioned that she had actually been a student of Tom's back at Concordia, and that he was one of her favorite professors. I was asked to write an article on Tom's work that was on an exhibition that was being held at the Jima Gallery. It was a large exhibition of about 80 works. I was asked by Parachute Magazine, which was a contemporary art quarterly, which was open to should we say, a more diverse approach than simply an art historical one. Because that was indeed the approach that I was bringing to it. I'm not trained in art history. I'm not trained in formal photographic studies. I had a communications degree from McGill University, and it was there that I was developed, if you wish, the ideas that I had about photography. One of the things that we had noticed at McGill was that there were a number, and this is Don Theo was the chairman at the time, there were a number of burgeoning, how should I put it, sociological and anthropological studies that were relying upon photography as their tool of evidence gathering and of analysis, because of its ability specifically to be able to grab micro moments and to hold them for study. And so we pointed out, for instance, that these people, who I would call the naturalists, for they borrowed a sort of kind of positivism and applied it to the human condition. These naturalists, or proto-scientists, used the camera to capture data bits for study. There was proxemics, which was deals with degrees of closeness, kinesics, which deals with motion, and all these micro moments of what we could call co-presence. And as such, they opened up certain vocabulary so that we could start talking about things like sight lines and thresholds and pathways and navigational ease, which is relying on protocols, routing, talking and walking. These are all examples and evidence of ritualized, repeated, and codified interaction. And one thing about it, the dean of this kind of study was a sociologist, Irving Goffman, who described what he was doing as observational sociology. He said, "The sociology of occasions is here advocated. I assume that the proper study of interaction is not the individual and his psychology, but rather the syntactical relations among the acts of different persons mutually present to one another. Not then men and their moments, rather moments and their men." So, armed with these ideas in mind, I approached Tom's work. As I said, there was a big exhibition, 80 works. And so when you have a collection of pieces that big, you can start triangulating and seeing similarities, seeing repetition, and you can start triangulating what is the position that Gibson was trying to form. And what I noticed was that he had a certain kind of banality, if you wish, a surface banality. There wasn't a lot of inherent purpose to the pictures or point to the pictures. But if you look through it, there was indeed all of these kinds of interactive, non-verbal communication, which at this point had become not only scientifically studied, but had become absorbed by the public and become, if you wish, a vernacular and even a folk knowledge at this point. So, for instance, one of the things that's quite important to Gibson's work is what I would call sight lines. We have two pictures here, and they're complementary. We'll start with this one over here, which is one of a clown performing a juggling act in Dominion Square Park. And as you can see, everybody's eyes, even the dog's eyes, are aimed at that. So in terms of sight lines, what we've got is, in the figure of the clown would be called a cynosure, or the particular focus of sight. Compare this to this one over to the right of that, which is a different kind of drama to it, in which case there is a fallen person, someone has collapsed and is attracted a certain amount of attention, but it is a mixed amount of attention. So we have this person who has paused, but he's looking sort of elsewhere, wondering whether to leave. These people are entirely involved. These people are involved, but at a distance. This woman is not involved at all. She's just trying to walk by. And these ones, again, are trying to figure out how much they want to commit themselves. And then you have the lady over here who's just looking for a taxi. And these people have already left. So here you've got a mix where there are degrees of investment in looking at what they beheld in front of them. The other thing that Tom deals with is a certain kind of synchronicity, which was a Jungian term for causal coincidence, how things happen at the same time, even though there's a relationship between them that would suggest that they were somehow or another linked, even though there's no causal link to them. And he was often finding scenes in which there would be a certain kind of repetition. Like here, for instance, you have this relief panel over here of soldiers holding their rifles. And you also have a man walking along with his umbrella, which just happens to be almost precisely the same angle as the soldiers. So there's a kind of mirroring. And it gives, if you wish, the urban scene a certain kind of harmony that he finds. And here in a picture from London, you've got a man holding a baby, and it's echoed by the woman up here holding a baby also. There is in rhetoric, there is a figure in rhetoric called prosopopoia, and that is when you give an imaginary figure voice and presence. It is when someone is called in to present themselves or to present words, even though they don't exist or not. Now, what Tom does is he found a number of ways in which there are sort of prosopopoia instances, but they're dealing with a modern industrial city, urban city. Here is a man, famous opera singer in downtown Montreal, a busker who sang opera. And as you can see, people are leaving, they've got their backs turned. But what is more, she's also got her back turned. So this woman from the Eaton sign has become to join the dialogue. She has now become part of the event. In the same way, if we go up here to another instance, we have a man walking along with his crutches, and he's being, if you wish, not observed. On the contrary, we have a woman here who's in fact ignoring him, looking away, looking askance at him, which again is a kind of commentary on the particular sorts of attention or lack of attention, if you wish, that the handicapped often experience. And as a final example here, we have Tom's walking across, he sees this over there, and there's a big sign on the side of the truck, and there's a woman, and she's looking, well, she's looking at us. She's looking here at the camera. But the tricky part, the part that makes us kind of make you laugh out loud, is that we have over here repeated a woman in the car, and she's also looking at us. So we have active dynamics of sight lines, of the kinds of constant cooperation that goes on in the urban transactions in the city, plus this prosopopoid additional figures, which make it quite vital. Now, the plus photographer in this case was Edward Muybridge. Now you might say, what has Muybridge got to do with this? Well, the thing is that Muybridge was the naturalist photographer. In fact, he took the camera to measure in strict terms. And if you notice the grid in the background, the grids in the background is there to measure in great accuracy both distance and time as the figures cross it. And again, calling these humans calling it animal locomotion is for us to be conjoined to the larger world of creatures, which was part of, again, the scientific approach. There's a lot of zoology in Tom's work, and that's really what's here. But these particular photographs are not typical of Muybridge and not his usual sorts of studies, but they're a bit of a joke on myself, because what I had done in my original essay on Tom back in 1981 was I brought up the fact that some Muybridge images were really a kind of soft pornography, and they didn't seem to have much analytical value. I have since read from Rebecca Solnit and Martha Braun that, in fact, Muybridge was never a purist in terms of being a scientific analyst. He was a narrator, and that these other stories that he brings in with the nudes and such are really just his form of adding a narrative dimension to the otherwise scientific studies of animal locomotion. We can move. Tom Gibson called me once and said, Robert, you've got to see this guy's work. He uses his flash to light up the dust balls. He was talking about the work of Donegan Cumming, who was a student of his. And I did go see his work, and I can't say that I wasn't untroubled initially. There was a difficulty, a transgression to his work that I had to get my head around. But I did discover a way of approaching his work that had to, that it was kind of corrective to the way in which documentary is used. And that is what Donegan Cumming has ended up doing. This particular selection of works here is from a series that he did between 1982 and 1986 called Reality and Motive in Documentary Photography. And it's a series of pictures of people in their homes in downtown Montreal. And for me, this is what I call the picture. This is the origin picture. And let me explain. The young man is carrying a case of beer and he's coming through the door. The original legend of Donegan's work was that he accompanied delivery boys from dépanneurs, beer delivery boys, as they went their rounds. And that gave him entree to people's homes, and he would then negotiate with them to take their pictures of their interiors. I call it a legend because, in fact, he didn't really do it that way. He met people on the street, and then he would talk to them, and then they would negotiate entry to the homes. But this, it seems to me, was an emblem of the way in which he was able to gain access to these interiors, for which he would then do his photographic work. When I was getting these shows framed, the framer asked me, he said, "Are these real people or are they actors?" And I could only reply, they are real people who are acting. And that is what Donegan did, was that he invited people to perform for his, if you wish, his repertoire of activities. Deanna Lawson, an American photographer, was interviewed portrayed in an article in the New York Times today, and in it she's referred to or described as asking people in their photographs to do strange things. And in some ways, Donegan has been often described as asking people to do strange things. Strange is a good word for it because it evokes the kind of theories of estrangement and alienation that Bertolt Brecht used. And what estrangement does and what alienation does is it throws dye into the water, the stream, so that activities and currents become visible. After he did this work, Donegan moved over to a project called Pretty Ribbons. Pretty Ribbons was an investigation of the aged body. Now, we meet the woman on the left here is named Nettie Harris, who we've actually already met from Reality and Motive of Documentary Photography. She's the woman standing in front of the refrigerator over here. And she was around 70 years old then. But when Donegan was working with her in Pretty Ribbons, which is a project, by the way, I said, that deals with the aged body, has men and women in it, but Nettie is clearly the star of it. She's not just a star, she's also a collaborator. In fact, there was an exhibition in London about the bodies of aged women. And some of these photographs were on display, and the commentator for that exhibition referred to Donegan and Nettie as collaborators. In fact, when the show was over and they listed the participants, Nettie Harris's name was there and not Donegan's. So she was clearly taking a controlling part of it. For a substantial period after Pretty Ribbons, Donegan did video work. He garnered a substantial reputation for that work. And more recently, I'd say in the last 5 years or so, Donegan has come to perform what I call an artistic recapitulation. And by that, I mean he has gone and revisited his earlier product, his earlier work, and brought it back into the present. It is not going back in a circular fashion. It's what I call going back in a cycle whereby you're slightly above the work and you bring it forward to the new, to the present, like in a spiral fashion. And I can refer to a particular example. This is a photograph, part of the reality and motive in photography, contemporary photography series, and it is a picture of Joe Martin, and he lives downtown, as you can see, because if you recognize the guaranteed milk bottle. And this is a picture from where is it from? From 1980, where is it? Okay. Okay, sorry, from 1983. That's correct, from 1983. So then he's taken that print, that picture, the negative, and he's turned it into a large contact type print. And as you can see, there's the photograph which we were just viewing over in reality and motive and documentary photography. And we see all of the other rejects, the ones that did not make the grade, as it were. So the contact print is kind of, it's like the unconscious, it's where the unfinished work goes. And then this was done in 2013. And then in 2015, he then goes and transforms it again by drawing over it, or drawing with it. It's a freehand reproduction, if you wish, of the contact print that we were just looking at. Now, for Donegan, the plus photographer is a man. Here is another example of this kind of recapitulation where he did some drawings and that again, and taking some grabs from earlier photographic work. And then over here, you can see this photograph here. You've got Ray with the microphone. And then over to the right, we have the drawing based, this drawing was based on the photograph we were just looking at, Ray with his microphone.
I'm going to go back to the Ray.
So as I was saying, for the plus photographer in Donegan's case, I was thinking of a photographer from Czech called Miroslav Tichý, and he was sort of an early member of Photo Brut. He was a man, he was a raw man, a rude man, a crude man, and he used a camera that was held together with duct tape and used cardboard extensions. He would then go and find people, usually women, to follow, and he would take their pictures. Sometimes mostly they were surreptitious, but sometimes the women would pose for him, thinking that his camera didn't actually work. But so they felt free to be able to pose for him. Now, he and Donegan, which makes them have some overlap, is that they were both transgressive in their approaches. I mean, Donegan had a difficult time initially because people thought that he'd been violating the protocols for documentary. They also both have what I call a generative hodology. Hodology is the study of pathways. So when before I was talking about Donegan's use of the streets to find people, or the legendary beer delivery boy. Miroslav Tihi, what he would do every day is that he would get his camera and he would go to the local Kiev train station where he lived, and then he would just wait until he saw someone that interested him, and then he would start following them. And then he would start taking pictures, and that would lead to somebody else. So both of them basically generated a series of subjects through the use of the randomness of a determined pathway, which made them, as I said, this generative hodology that they had. And so these are fun. The colors are just, I chose because the colors here, this frame is a cardboard frame, crude again, that Tihi would often make and he would draw on in these sorts of confectionery colors. And I also wanted to retain the physical volume that these kinds of, that his processing did. He left them, he tore them, he wrote on them, and I wanted to have that tangent, that really, the thingness of the pictures maintained. Our third person is Michel Campo, born in 1948. He's a real Montreal native. The others are Montreal residents, Montreal immigrants. And if you see, there's some joy and delight in these pictures because Michel himself is a joyful man. The underlying support I find for his work is that he's what I would call a mythopoetic artist. In the sense that he's dealing with the ways in which artists take matter that they have received and they transform it into new matter, into their own creative work. He's a man who decided fairly early on that photography and the life it offered would be his avenue for discovered meaning. And there's a picture here of the young Michel and the old Michel. And they serve as a kind of, they have what you could be called a homonymic relationship. There is an echo here, the sounds like, looks like. And the idea is that the child pursues him, he said. Or as James Joyce put it in Ulysses, the child is the father to the man. Basically, he's saying is that there as an infant, he was already determined to go and become a photographer. There are many themes that Michel has worked on over his career. We have present here 5 of them. This grouping here is called Weekend au Paradis Terrestre, which is a series he did in the early 80s. Then we have a series over here, which when he turns to playing with what nature gives us, the arborescence, or canopies. We have to the far right these pictures, which are part of a series called Tremblant de Coeur, which is more reflective, biographical, again, looking at the ways in which he could turn his life into his art. The woman here is his wife, Nicole. And then there are the pictures from what became the Darkroom series, which there are 2 examples here. 3 examples. We've got these. This is a darkroom in Africa. This is a Montreal darkroom. And then this is another Montreal darkroom. And this is a bit of ironic one. This is actually from Donegan Cummings' darkroom. And the young woman here is a portrait of the 11-year-old Martha Langford, who is married to Donegan, and she's a well-known and important figure in the photography world in Canada. She's at Concordia University. The weekend au Paradis Terrestre is, of course, ironic, and it's I don't think people will claim we have reached Paradis Terrestre, but the thing is that it is a collection of pictures of people at leisure, people on vacation, people at recreation. And this is a theme that he picked up from a number of sources, but including Tony Ray Jones, who was a British photographer and who had written a book on holidaying, basically. It's called A Day Off, an English Journal. So it was important to him. Now, the darkrooms are what you might call an idiotopic space, but what that means is that it's very personalized, individualized. The darkrooms are furnished, if you wish, with objects and tools and chemicals and such, which are easily at hand, as determined by the darkroom operator, darkroom user himself. And so they're not public spaces, so they have a certain kind of messiness to them because of their particular use of need. This photo that I got from Africa, of the African one, I joked with the dealer that it's basically two pictures, because you could cut this one off or cut that one off. You could have two Michel Campo darkrooms from that, because he dealt with these what are called metonymic parts, where metonymy means the part that represents the whole, or as Kenneth Burke put it, representation by reduction. And he uses that element, that trope, that rhetorical device a lot. The way in which an individual object, a partial object, can serve to represent the entirety of the object of study. One day, Michel and I were talking, and he asked me if I knew anyone who collected cameras. And I thought, I said, yes, in fact, I do. What it was is that my daughter went to school with a woman whose father did collect cameras. It was Bruce Anderson. And Bruce Anderson had a fair collection, a substantial collection. And so I spoke to him, and he was willing to do it. So I met with Bruce Anderson and Michel in Bruce's offices over on Sherbrooke Street. They talked together, they made an agreement, and then I walked away. And Michel set up his screen and took some 80 pictures of these cameras. And they are part of a big series that was at the National Gallery. The series is called Splendor and Industrial Fetishism, bracket the Bruce Anderson collection. And it's quite different from the darkroom series in the sense that there's a purity and cleanliness and focus and that you don't see in the darkroom series, because what he just wanted to celebrate the fetishistic technical delight to be found in these ranges of cameras. Our plus photographer in this case is Martin Parr. Martin Parr is a British photographer who shares with Michel a couple of things. One is that he has an interest in leisure. He again owes a debt, an acknowledged debt to Tony Ray Jones for that. And in this instance here, for instance, we have the top one as part of a study that he did called Small World, which is about tourism. And the bottom one is from a book called Common Sense, which dealt really with British popular taste, if you wish, or lack of it. And he also is very interested in the whole culture of the photography itself, and it reflects on the photography as an activity, as a pursuit, as a hobby, as a source of kitsch. So he shares that with Michel, and more specifically, he facilitated Michel's getting his darkroom project published by Press, and he wrote the introduction for it. And it's over here in this vitrine here. The display case here does not represent some of the publications that these photographers have done. Now, Tom it was never a big thing for him to do publications. There is a catalog that was presented at a group show. But Donegan and Michel have both made an important part of their career has been the development and production of publications around particular themes, with certain ideas, and this represents just some of them that are there. Because they both agree, they both are committed to the idea that a photograph can find its realization in a published form. So I hope you can come and see the pictures, enjoy them. They're a pleasure for me, as you can imagine. I had to sort of revisit some of these pictures when I was organizing the show and getting ready for framing. And I have to tell you, I was sometimes found laughing out loud just at the sheer joy of it sometimes. And I want to thank you all for listening to me, and I'm not too sure whether questions will be possible, but if there are questions, I'll try to answer.
Thank you very much, Robert.